So, very happy to be joined right now by the one, the only Kyle Kulinski, Mr. Big Seltzer himself. Thanks for coming on the show, Kyle.
By the way, no big deal, but we
He's got
got
a
the
seltzer in his
we got
hands.
the
He's
seltzer.
proving he's proving all of the conspiracies correct right now. So, Kyle, the big thing that I wanted to start off with you on is obviously how did we get to this point? And I think that I should start off with this, which is that you led me down the wrong track in the 2024 election. I was saying, and you can check the record on this on my channel for weeks, for months leading up to the election. I said, my gut says Trump is going to win. The main reason that I said that is because we had polling data that a vast majority of the country thinks we're heading on the wrong track, right? People still feel fucked over. They feel left behind. The economy's not working for them. People want to change candidate. Kamala's not repping as a change candidate. So I said Trump was going to lose. I then watched some of your videos hyping up the Kamala campaign. You made me very confident. You changed my opinion on a 180, okay? And then I made my final prediction on my channel in front of the people who watch my channel saying that Kamala was going to win. Why did you do that to me? What made you so confident? What made you so confident that Kamala was going to win at the end of the day? And why did she end up falling short?
So first of all, I'm responsible for screwing over like everybody in our field because anybody who watches any of my segments, I think I was able to convince an ungodly number of people with some amount of influence and sway that, oh man, yeah, maybe she is going to win. I had to reel myself in, dude. I thought so in my heart of hearts, the day before the election, I was like, all right, let me do three maps. One like worst case scenario for Kamala, one like my closest prediction, and then the other, the bull case on Kamala. And even my worst case for Kamala still had her with like 280 something electoral votes. Um, and so, but in my heart of hearts, I was thinking like, I don't even think 312 is, I think she might like grab Iowa or something. So like even my prediction, I
Was it
sort of
that
like
Ann Seltzer poll or like what?
now you want to talk about screwing people that she really threw me because I was already starting to feel confident based on the trajectory of the campaigns. And then when that Seltzer poll dropped, I was like,
That's what really
oh,
flipped me. That's what
yeah.
really flipped me because
I
I
was
was really
like,
hesitant before that, and I was like, huh, there's got to be something here in the Midwest, or like she's not. I don't think she's going to win Iowa, but like there are some other indicators that are at play right now. But
yeah, she had such a great track record for so long.
right,
And then she just missed this by like 16 points or something insane like that. So that not only that, but also Michael Moore, who's predicted every election right since 2016, and he was like
yeah,
the only person to have done that.
yeah,
He was saying Kamala landslide, and he was saying women are going to get her across the finish line, and it's not going to be particularly close. So you mix that with there were also some interesting poll numbers about how like even though people think the country's on the wrong track, there was some good evidence for her. There was an increase in registrations among a lot of young people and young Black women in particular. And then, look, I thought ultimately in the closing weeks, her last ads were pretty solid. She was going after Trump uh, over billionaire stuff and basically connecting him to Elon Musk and connecting him to Epstein and saying, like, I'm going to represent you. And the $6,000 child tax credit was great. Picking Tim Walz was great. Even the price gouging thing, she started the campaign with the ban on price gouging for groceries and sort of dropped it in the middle, but then towards the end, sort of brought it back up again in the closing weeks of the campaign. And I was like, when you mix her campaign being way better than Hillary 2016, in my opinion, and Trump's campaign being the worst of his three campaigns, 91 criminal charges and all that stuff. And just basically every campaign stop for Trump, he's like, I'm going to do revenge and
right,
retribution and vengeance. And I'm like, I'm sitting here going, well, whatever criticisms I have of Kamala, and I do like the Liz Cheney strategy and stuff like that, my
sure,
criticisms of Trump are like 7 times more. And
yeah,
so I made the mistake of projecting my feelings sort of onto the electorate and sort of assuming that everybody else is paying the same amount of attention that I'm paying to it. And most importantly, that they're like sort of taking Kamala at her word when she says $6,000 child tax credit and things of that nature. But ultimately, I think it all came to naught because people just didn't believe Kamala. They view her as an insincere,
But
inauthentic politician who doesn't believe anything.
that's
And
kind of
Trump,
accurate though, right?
it,
Isn't
it
it?
is accurate. But when you have somebody who's just sort of like a machine politician, let's call her,
Yeah.
versus an authoritarian fascist, I thought voters are probably going to break for, the standard politician. But that
Yeah.
wasn't true. It turns out people wanted that big change. And that big change came in the form of an authoritarian, but people would rather have a revolutionary conservative than a non-revolutionary.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think that's basically what it comes down to for me is that people, and this is sort of just like a perpetual thing in American politics because of how broken, corrupt, rotten to its core our economy is, our political system is. Everybody at this point, or not everybody, but most people at this point, I think, view our government as completely broken. And when you have somebody like Trump, who is at least acknowledging their pain, their suffering, here I'm going to pick out some enemies for you, even though I'm wrong about the enemies I'm picking out, like immigrants and trans people and gay people and whatever else the case may be. Like looking back on it, sort of doing like a Monday morning quarterback type of analysis, like it seems kind of inevitable that Trump was going to win. You have a candidate in Kamala Harris who was never really that popular to begin with. If you rewind back to the 2020 Democratic primary, she was one of the least popular candidates in that election. She had to drop out before Iowa. You know all of that. She ends up becoming the VP. She's given some tough jobs as a part of the Biden administration, like on the border, which she didn't really have that much control over the end of the day, at the end of the day. But you end up with this candidate in Kamala who's trying to run with the triangulation strategy of let me try to win over some anti-Trump Republicans. I'll sprint to the center on immigration. I'll sprint to the center on climate change and a whole host of other issues. And I guess, again, what it comes down to at the core of it is that people are fed up with the current status quo. And so, of course, the more sort of, I guess, quote unquote, radical or the person who is running as an anti establishment, even if that's not true, or an anti elite, even if that's not true, or an anti war, even if that's not true, kind of candidate is going to end up winning. I mean, that seems sort of inevitable looking back on it, right? So, I guess, where do Democrats go from here? Like, Kamala failed, Hillary failed, Biden sort of like squeaked by a win given the COVID pandemic, given the economic crash that was happening at the time. Where do Democrats go in the meantime? Because we're hearing all of these different analyses from top Democratic, liberal punditry and whatever else the case may be about how it's the woke radical left's fault and everybody who is criticizing Biden and we didn't go hard enough on trans people or immigration or whatever else the case may be. Like, where do you think Democrats go from here? Like, is it even possible that Democrats learn the lesson from this election, from the Hillary election, and move forward in a way that is capable of challenging right-wing populism in a meaningful way?
It's more possible than it was in 2016 that we get some of that, but still the most likely scenario would be what we've seen happen with Chris Murphy, where like he flirts with the right idea, he flirts with maybe economic populism is the correct way to go, but then ultimately he lands on, oh, we need a bigger tent. And by that I mean if you're anti-trans and anti-immigrant and conservative on other social issues, welcome. We're going to now start moderating even more on social issues. I think that's the easy answer. That's the easy way out. That means you don't have to challenge your donors. So I
Right.
think that is the most likely path for Democrats. But at the same time, it is more of a wild card than it's been in the past, particularly because this is such a crushing defeat that it doesn't feel like 2016 where the reaction in 2016 was like, oh, it was a fluke. Hillary won by 3 million votes
Because you
anyway.
won the popular vote and,
Yeah,
it was a different
let's not
situation.
change much. Now
Yeah.
you have, as I'm sure you saw, people like Jen Psaki and the Pod Save Bros and David Brooks and others at the very least saying, Bernie may have had a point because the demographics that we lost with are the exact demographics that Bernie was strongest with. And I think that's worth something, right? So I think a lot of people especially in DC, have a lot of non-answers in their heads, and they're sort of grasping for anything at the moment, and so that leaves a vacuum for people like you and me to come in and try to set the record straight and try to get the narrative out there that matters. So, for example, I've pointed this out, but I really believe if Democrats had passed that original Build Back Better bill, I really think Kamala would have won.
Yeah.
Part of the problem with my analysis and being so sure that Kamala was going to win is that, again, I projected what I knew onto other people, and I shouldn't have done that. So it's not like on economics, the Biden administration was the best presidency of my lifetime, and it's not particularly close.
So
Right?
let me interrupt you real quick because you're getting to a point that I've been struggling to come to grips with over this election cycle specifically, which is that the Bernie campaign in my sort of like political awakening 2016, 2020, that made me focus basically purely on policy, right? So my priority is I don't care what narrative you're selling. I don't care what you have to do. But if you are actually willing to go to the mat and to fight for policies that I think are advantageous towards advancing the material interests of working class people, I will support you. In this election, and I agree with what you were just saying in terms of the Biden administration, they had a good NLRB, they had a good FTC under Lena Khan. You know, they did the Chips and Science Act and all of these other things that, you know, were sort of like at least half steps or steps in the right direction. But the difficult realization that I've been trying to grapple with in this election is that most of American politics is just vibes.
That's right.
It's just
Yep.
vibes. It's just a narrative. And and we had earlier today on Breaking Points, Griffin did some interviews with some AOC Trump voters, right? So some people who voted for AOC at the more local level for Congress and then voted for Trump at the national level. And it was just interesting because it's like it doesn't really have anything to do with policy. They couldn't be more diametrically opposed when it comes to actual policy, but it's just vibes. They feel like Trump is fighting for them. They feel like AOC is fighting for them. They feel like they're outside the establishment. How do you combat that if you're the Democratic Party? Like, how do you recover from that, given the fact that we know Democrats are largely, at least the establishment is controlled by corporate interests and by billionaires and whatever else the case may be? Like, is it even recoverable at this point? Like, because we can talk about, okay, here's what Democrats need to do. Here's the playbook. We know it's left-wing economic populism. We know it's class war. We know what needs to be done in order to win elections. But are they even capable of doing that, given the
Well,
corporate interests?
I mean, the short answer is think of Trump on the Republican side when he came in 2015. It was, I mean, you want to talk about a party that's beholden to corporate interests. You want
Yeah.
to talk about a party that's stuck in their ways and set in their mindset. The Republicans are even more so than the Democrats. And so here you have a guy who was an outsider and just came in and broke the mold. He said things you were not allowed to say. He was out up there in a Republican primary debate in a military state of South Carolina, I believe it was. And he said to Jeb Bush's face, "The towers came down under your brother's watch. The towers came down under your brother's watch. And we're allowed to make mistakes, but that Iraq war, that was a beauty. That was a real one."
Right.
And what that showed is whatever people think the rules are in politics as it pertains to campaigning, you're wrong. There are no rules. You
Right.
make up the rules as you go. So to get back to your previous point, which is a super important one, yes, a lot of what politics is, especially in the field of campaigning and just trying to get in office, a lot of what it is, it's narrative, it's charisma, it's authenticity, it's strength. And like, okay, so yes, vibes can get you to win, but vibes will also only get you so far, right? Because at the same time, if you really do address people's needs materially, there will be a benefit. So the problem with all the half decent things the Democrats did this time around is that most of the positive things are going to have their long-term effects.
Yeah.
They're not immediate. You don't feel them right away. The one that was immediate was the child tax credit and the expanded social safety net during COVID, but that had a sunset provision on it, and they went away.
Right.
And by the way, that happens to perfectly coincide with when Biden's poll numbers fell off a cliff. Is as soon as we stopped the COVID social safety net programs, as soon as we got rid of the extended child tax credit, there was a reduction of child poverty of nearly 50%. And then that went away, and boom, child poverty shoots back up. So we watched it get cut in half and then come roaring back. There are going to be some electoral consequences for that. So it is both true that policy matters a lot, but it's also true that you have to package that with narrative and charisma and authenticity and strength. And when I say the Democrats are lacking in the realm of narrative and charisma and authenticity and strength, boy, oh boy, do I mean it. Because you gotta get that special mix. You gotta have like a special character who can sort of break through, who people believe, like, yeah, they're gonna fight, they're gonna do something, they're gonna change things. And that's what Trump has, that element where people think he's gonna change things.
So
whereas Kamala doesn't.
Let's get into that, because you've been very forthright in advocating for Jon Stewart to run in 2028. Now, let me just say up front, like, I think Jon Stewart would be a solid candidate. Okay. I think he could win in a Democratic primary, certainly. I think in a general election, depending on who the Republican candidate is, I think he would have a strong shot. I'm not against the proposal of having Jon Stewart run. I have a little bit of question in terms of, I guess, his acumen when it comes to actually following through and being able to implement left-wing policy goals, because he is more of just like a charismatic figure who advocates for left-wing causes. I don't know how much he understands like the inner, machinations or whatever the case may be about how politics actually works when you're the president, but I think he would be a decent candidate. You've said basically, what are the three main things that you've been pitching in terms of what a Democratic candidate needs in order to combat Trumpism, right? It's like celebrity
Controversy,
status,
controversy, charisma, celebrity.
Okay. So that brings me, I guess, sort of to this. We'll get more into that conversation here in a second. But that brings me into this early morning Bernie Sanders email. Now, I guess this has been viewed in a number of different ways, sort of ominous to me. This was sent out on November 23rd here. But he basically gets into like, the American people understand that our economic and political systems are rigged. Democrats are not going to learn the lessons from this election. He asks questions, how do we build sustainable long-term issue-based organizing structures that live beyond individual campaigns? These are some of the questions we need to address. It's critical we make our voice heard during this process, not me, us, et cetera, et cetera. What do you make of this Bernie letter here? What do you think he's getting at? Some people are floating that he's thinking about starting a third party. I have my doubts on that, but what do you think that Bernie's trying to get at in this letter? And I guess furthermore, like, what do Democrats do in 2028? Because my position is like, it would be great to have somebody like Jon Stewart. He is charismatic. He is somewhat divisive. He does have that celebrity status where you can't ignore him. But, Bernie, had it not been for the Democratic establishment of the party sabotaging him back to back, I think he would have won against Trump in 2016 and in 2020. So I don't think you necessarily need that celebrity status aspect of it. I really think you just need somebody who is credible in leaning into left-wing economic populism as a candidate in order to defeat the so-called Trumpism, I guess, in the current status. Yeah.
Here's the problem with that. Do you remember how the corporate media handled Bernie?
Yeah.
How did they handle him?
How he's going to be executing Chris Matthews in Central Park, and he is a radical socialist. And how are you going to pay for it and all of these things? Sure.
That was at the end when it looked
initially it was a blackout. Initially it was just not covering him.
Right. So follow me here. Follow me here.
Sure.
They did a media blackout on him, even when he was surging from like 1% up to like 35%. He had to get above like 45% before they decided, oh shit, we got to shiv this guy in the side.
Yeah.
So for him, it was a media blackout. Why was it a media blackout? Because he really does threaten the status quo. He really does threaten the system.
Right.
But his stump speeches are all, we need to raise the top marginal tax rate to 70%, and we need universal health care, and we need higher wages. It's all stuff people like you and I love, right?
Yeah.
But it's not something that's going to get a panel on CNN to talk about for 2 hours and really focus on and give free media coverage to. So this gets back to the celebrity, charismatic, controversial thing. The cameras could not stay off Trump because whatever he
Right.
did was newsworthy.
Sure.
He was funny. He was extreme. He was pissing people off left and right. He was getting people to his side left and right. And they just could not. The squeaky wheel gets the grease in this political media sphere. They could not stop talking about him. They could not stop talking about his proposals and what his tweet was and what he said over here and how he disrespected John McCain and did this and did that.
Mm-hmm.
So the celebrity angle, we know our culture is obsessed with celebrities. The controversy angle, we know if you're controversial, they will talk about it. And what we learned from Trump is, even if it's to denounce you 24/7, the fact that they're talking about you means for every one person that rules you out forever because of what you said, two others are going to go, that's kind of cool. And the name spreads further and the name spreads wider, and you get your message gets out more and more. So the advantage of somebody like Jon Stewart is he's a political outsider. He hasn't internalized all of the bullshit rules and decorum of Washington, D.C. And the reason I like this formula is because ultimately, at my core, I'm an empiricist. And I believe in what you can prove to me works. And this is the most recent model that has objectively worked. It worked with Trump in 2016. It worked with Trump in 2024. It probably would have worked with him in 2020 if it wasn't for COVID and how horribly he mishandled that. And then on top of that, here's a guy who did go and get 9/11 first responders healthcare in DC. And he explained how that process was the most maddening thing he'd ever been through and ever witnessed firsthand. And he was shocked at just how broken and disgusting and decrepit our system was. So he really is kind of like the perfect formula in order to break through. And in a world that made sense, if he were to run, it would be the case that the media sort of treats him like they treated Trump. And he would be saying things that people are like, whoa, like one of the things I floated in a segment I did is, what if he were to go up there and say, billionaires shouldn't exist? They shouldn't exist. Every dollar over $999 million should be taxed at 100%.
Sure.
That would, oh my God, radical extreme. Let's talk about it 24/7. But the whole time people are like, huh, that's interesting. I never thought about it like that. Right. Yeah. So, but your question on Bernie, what does he have planned? Just to get to that, I don't know either. I'm like you. I'm skeptical of I hear a lot of speculation. Oh, he's going to start a third party. If he was going to do that, he would have done it in 2016.
He's like 90 years old. Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, let's say in 2016, for argument's sake, he did that. He started a third party. Here's how that would have gone. It would have started at like 3% in the polls. Even in a best case scenario where he gets widespread support, it would get up to 20% in the polls. Then in 2020, Trump would have gotten reelected and Bernie's party would have taken 20% from the Democratic totals. Then the Democrats would have declared all-out war on this new Bernie party. And then the Republicans have a governing majority for 40 years or whatever it is because of the damage that was created. Or let's
so are you of the belief then that there is no solution in reality other than working within the means of the Democratic Party and just trying to forcefully overtake it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless there's
ranked choice voting. I mean,
yeah, that's the one exception. The one exception is we get ranked choice voting first.
Which is really not going to happen.
Do it.
I mean,
which is not going to happen, especially because why? We just had like 4 or 5 different direct ballot initiatives on electoral reforms, like ranked choice voting in some states and like open primaries in other states, and they lost virtually everywhere. Yeah. Even in Alaska, they had a vote to try to get rid of their ranked choice voting system that they already have. Ranked choice voting held on by just the tiniest bit. They barely voted to reaffirm ranked choice voting. So for all intents and purposes, it's dead. You know, like the Green Party got 0.5% of the vote. What did they get in 2016? Like 3 or 4% of the vote. They almost got to 5% in 2016.
Yeah, and it's you could have added up in this election. I mean, you could have added up all of the third party votes.
Yep,
wouldn't have made a difference.
Wouldn't have made
Kamala
a difference.
Winning or losing.
So what's possible? What Bernie might be talking about? This is possible. Although again, I don't know. He could be thinking of launching something with the DSA model, right? Where it's like, here's our group. We have our group. The Labor Party, or I guess you can't call it a party if you're going to do it, if you're going to do the DSA model. But like, let's say the Labor Association or the Independent Association or the Workers Association, something like that, right? And then you say, we are going to endorse the candidates who sort of fit our agenda, and then they're going to run as Democrats, right? That's possible. It's also possible. Remember, Bernie's 1,000 years old. He might just mean, stay tuned. We're going to have some committee hearings, and it'll be 7 of them, and it'll be huge.
Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. Well, so what I'm hearing is that the Democratic Party establishment is absolutely cooked. The country might be cooked. Jon Stewart might be our last and final opportunity to break through that party.
But hold on, I will say this. This is a bad scenario too, but it's very possible.
Sure.
Trump is going to fuck this up so bad, people have no idea. It's going to be a mess. It's going to be
that might also happen. Well, save it for that. Save it for because we're going to get to that in the next segment.
Okay, but I was going to say when that happens, any Democrat could win just by being a Democrat.
Sure. No,
right. Yeah.
I never thought, like, even this election, even though I thought Kamala ran a bad campaign. Well, I agree with you that she ran a better campaign than Hillary. I think she ran a slightly worse, or actually significantly worse campaign than Biden did in 2020. But I still think it was winnable.
That's interesting. That's interesting to me.
I still think it was winnable because, well, the reason I say that is just because Biden at least had that pressure from the Bernie primary where he was at least leaning in a little bit more to false promises of progressive economic things like the $15 minimum wage and the public option, whatever else that he didn't follow through on. And
he never talked about it. He never, at least Kamala talked about the $6,000 child tax credit
a little bit, but that's
banning price gouging for groceries.
That's sure. We could have a whole nother conversation about that. I'm sure I could continue on that for like 15 minutes, but
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying